Okay, so just a few weeks back, August 2025, all eyes were on the Anchorage Accords, right?
Yeah.
This historic meeting between President Trump and President Putin.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the headlines everywhere were pretty dramatic, world peace and WWII hanging in the balance. I mean, the stakes seemed incredibly high.
hmm
Makes you wonder what was really going on behind the scenes.
Well, yeah, and what's really fascinating, maybe even a bit strange, is the timing of something else. Around the same period, back in May 2025, and then again just now, September 8th,
Okay.
this mysterious Russian shortwave radio station, UVB-76. Some people call it the buzzer.
Oh, I think I've heard of that. The one that just makes that weird sound.
That's the one. It suddenly ramped up its broadcasts,
Sure.
like really intensified them. And it even sent out coded words, things like NZHTI and hotel, right
Yeah.
before one of those Trump-Putin phone calls.
Wow. Okay, so that's more than just a coincidence, you're thinking.
It certainly makes you pause, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
suggests these things, the big diplomatic meetings and these, well, cryptic signals,
Yeah.
they might not be isolated events at all.
So you're saying they could be connected, like threads in a much bigger picture.
Exactly. These kinds of things, they really show how much domestic politics, a leader's own views, and even these hidden communication channels can shape huge global events, like the war in Ukraine, for instance.
Right.
We're basically unwrapping the hidden forces, everything from White House deals to these kind of weird radio signals that are actually reshaping the world's most critical conflicts right now.
Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into the sources we've gathered. We want to understand how these domestic factors in the US, in Europe, in Russia are really driving the approaches to global conflict.
hmm
And we'll focus particularly on the Russia-Ukraine situation, looking at the really divided conservative views here in the US.
Yeah, it's definitely not one single view.
And also Russia's own strategy, right? Their information warfare and that doomsday radio thing you mentioned.
Yeah, the buzzer.
Right. So our mission here is to pull out the key insights, give you a shortcut to getting up to speed, and, maybe spark a few aha moments. Sound good?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this first part then. When we look at how the U.S. views the Ukraine situation, the sources show it's really fragmented. Especially within conservative circles, it's not simple at all.
Not at all.
Hmm.
You've got one very prominent view, often linked to former President Trump and many Matthieu supporters. It's that America first or kind of populist conservative stance.
Okay, and what's the core idea there?
The core idea, basically, that Ukraine can't win the war. Simple as that. And because of that, they should surrender territory.
Surrender territory. Wow.
Yeah. And not only that, but they should also pay back the U.S. for the billions in aid we've sent. The argument is that aid is adding to the U.S. national debt.
Mm.
So this perspective really prioritizes U.S. interest above all else. It questions why American lives, or even just significant amounts of money, should be put at risk for what they see as a, quote, losing battle.
So it's not just about the money, it's a deeper questioning of America's role in the world. Kind of a shift away from being the world's policeman, maybe.
That's a big part of it, yeah. And this viewpoint often stirs things up by arguing that NATO expanding towards Russia was actually the main cause of the war.
Ah, the provocation argument.
Right, seeing NATO as this anti-Russian coalition, a direct threat. So naturally, that leads to calls to rethink NATO's whole purpose. Some even bring up the Cuban Missile Crisis as a parallel, trying to understand Russia's viewpoint.
And it's not just about alliances, is it? The sources also say this perspective is more open to talking directly with adversaries.
Exactly. It really emphasizes diplomacy, even with countries many see as hostile, respecting Russia as a nuclear power, engaging directly. You see this in Trump's push for his Art of the Peace deal and those meetings he had with Putin this year, February and August.
Right.
Some even talk about leveraging potential mineral windfalls in peace talks for both the U.S. and Ukraine. And there's definitely a general skepticism about, trying to spread democracy overseas, pointing to failures in the Middle East as proof it doesn't work.
Okay, so that's the America First angle. But, crucially, that's not the only conservative viewpoint out there, is it? Many traditional conservatives seem to have a completely different take.
Oh, completely different. You have a very strong, traditional conservative sort of anti-appeasement stance that flat out rejects the America First ideas.
And their main point.
Their main point is pretty blunt. Russia is an enemy sworn to our destruction, and supporting Ukraine strongly is absolutely vital. For this group, appeasement is a dirty word. They believe it simply doesn't work and would only encourage totalitarian regimes like Russia and maybe even China down the line.
So they're advocating for more support for Ukraine, military, financial, the works.
Absolutely. Robust support. Some even suggest bringing Ukraine into NATO, putting allied troops near the border to, really guarantee security.
And what's their argument about U.S. credibility in all this?
That's central. They argue that abandoning Ukraine now would be a betrayal of our allies and would seriously damage U.S. credibility worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And that could have knock-on effects, they say, especially with other challenges like Taiwan. For them, the U.S. has to show strength and resolve to keep its global standing.
And they're critical of Trump's approach.
Very critical. Some sources mention conservatives expressing, quote, disgust with what they see as Trump's pro-Russian leanings. And they also criticize past administrations pointing fingers at Obama's 1980s foreign policy comment about Russia, for example, for being too soft, for appeasement.
Right.
There's one quote that really sums it up. Any self-respecting conservative should be chomping at the bit to screw over Russia at every turn. It's a much more confrontational view.
Definitely a clash of ideas there within the conservative movement. One side wants disengagement, the other wants confrontation. So where do the fiscal conservatives fit in, the ones focused on the budget?
Right, then you have the fiscal conservatives. They look at this mainly through the lens of cost and responsibility. Their big thing is the financial burden on the U.S. and, importantly, what Europe should be doing.
So the argument is the U.S. can't afford it.
Pretty much. They argue the U.S. is, quote, broke, pointing to the massive national debt. Now, the actual aid to Ukraine, especially military aid, is technically a tiny fraction of the U.S. budget, something like 0.01%.
Okay.
And importantly, a lot of that money actually creates jobs right here in the U.S. making weapons and equipment. But this group still sees any foreign aid as part of a bigger financial problem that needs controlling.
And they're pointing fingers at Europe, too.
Definitely. They demand much bigger contributions from European allies, pointing out that Europe has historically underfunded its own defense.
Yeah, that's a long-standing criticism.
Right. They get criticized for not taking Russian threats seriously enough, for depending too much on American military spending, and, being unwilling to raise taxes for more military spending themselves. For fiscal conservatives, it's about fair burden sharing in NATO.
Great. One more perspective here. The realpolitik view. Focusing on geopolitical priorities, how does that angle work?
This perspective takes a step back and looks at the global chessboard. The core argument is that the U.S. has limited resources, money, attention, military assets, and needs to focus on the biggest long-term threats.
Which they see as China.
Primarily China, yes, and the situation around Taiwan. The idea is that the Ukraine conflict, however important, is diverting critical resources away from the Indo-Pacific, which they see as the main arena for competition.
So Ukraine is seen as less strategically vital.
Some proponents put it quite bluntly, arguing Ukraine offers, quote, nothing that we need strategically. It's a very cold, calculated assessment of national interest.
And this view leads to a policy that shifts focus and resources away from Europe and towards Asia.
That's the logical outcome, yes. It also involves trying to understand Russia's perspective, maybe acknowledging their concerns about NATO expansion or their desire for buffer states, not necessarily agreeing with it, but seeking pragmatic, less confrontational solutions.
So, pulling it all together, the conservative approach to Ukraine is clearly not unified. It's this real mix of ideas: America first, pulling back, traditional conservatives pushing forward, fiscal conservatives watching the bottom line, and realpolitik folks looking at the bigger map. It really shows how much domestic debates shape foreign policy.
Absolutely. And if we pivot now and look at Russia, their approach is also deeply tied to their own domestic situation, their internal dynamics, and, well, a pretty carefully thought out strategic playbook. It's not just about tanks and missiles.
That's interesting. Let's dig into those domestic drivers. You mentioned leadership and ideology. Nikolai Patrushev, the Security Council Secretary.
Yeah, Patrushev. He's been in that powerful post since 2008, and he has this very hawkish view. He genuinely seems to believe the West is out to destroy Russia.
And he's close to Putin.
Very close. Their relationship goes way back, built on loyalty, shared background in the security services, and that closeness means his views heavily influence Russia's overall strategy. He's a central figure in what some call the mobilization party.
Mobilization party? What does that mean?
It's basically a faction pushing for Russia to be on a kind of constant state footing, statist, nationalist, authoritarian, a strong top-down government driving everything, especially foreign policy and defense.
And it's not just one person, right? You mentioned the Security Council itself acts as a sort of consensus builder.
Exactly. It's where the powerful figures, the Siloviki and others, hammer out major policies. They drafted the 2016 Information Security Doctrine, for example.
And what did that doctrine do?
It essentially formalized their view of information as a weapon. It blurs the lines between media, the state, the military. They've really institutionalized information warfare as a core part of strategy, not just a reaction.
Okay.
And beyond that, you have Putin using foreign conflicts, using NATO as this external enemy, this boogeyman.
To distract from problems at home.
Precisely. To maintain stability, rally support, and deflect anger away from domestic issues like the economy or social problems. It's a classic move, but very effective for controlling the narrative inside Russia.
And controlling the narrative extends outside Russia, too, through information warfare and propaganda. Sources mention two sides of a propaganda war. How does that actually work?
Well, the Russian propaganda machine, as the sources call it, is definitely active. It uses social media and other channels to try and influence American opinions, maybe pushing narratives that blame NATO expansion for the war, for instance.
Right.
But the sources are careful to note it's not always one-sided. Pro-Ukrainian narratives might also use propaganda techniques to build support and sympathy in the U.S. It's a complex information environment out there.
Yeah, it makes it really hard to sort out fact from fiction sometimes. The sources point to specific Kremlin narratives being repeated by some political figures, even wild stuff like bioweapons labs.
Or the idea that Ukraine joining NATO would automatically mean World War III. These are labeled in the sources as outright Russian propaganda.
But then, on the flip side, there was that reported admission by the U.S. about spreading disinformation about potential Russian chemical weapons back in 2022.
Exactly. It shows just how murky this information battleground really is. It's hard to know who to trust.
Which brings us back to that really strange element you mentioned earlier, UVB-76, the buzzer. This isn't propaganda, is it? It's something else entirely.
Totally different. Yeah, UVB-76 or sometimes MDZHB. It's this old Russian shortwave station, been broadcasting since the 70s, maybe early 80s, on 4,625 kilohertz. And most of the time, it just broadcasts this monotonous buzzing sound.
Just buzzing for decades.
Pretty much. But then, every so often, it stops buzzing and transmits these weird, cryptic messages. Russian names, strings of numbers, coded words.
And you said its activity spiked recently.
Dramatically, yeah, in 2025. The sources noted transmissions happened around big events like that Putin-Trump call in May, or when the U.S. hit nuclear sites in Iran in June. And then just recently, September 8th, those code words, NZHTI and hotel.
So what do people think it is?
The widely accepted theory is that it's a Russian military numbers station. Basically, a way to send coded messages secretly to intelligence operatives, spies, military units out in the field, like a digital dead drop.
Okay, that makes a certain kind of Cold War sense. But why still use shortwave radio in 2025 with satellites and encrypted internet?
That's the really fascinating part. It suggests that maybe these old-school low-tech methods are still valued because they're reliable, hard to trace, maybe hard to jam compared to digital stuff.
Right.
Perhaps it's a backup system, a fail-safe.
Interesting.
It adds another layer of mystery to how Russia operates strategically. Now, there was that other theory, the dead hand one.
Right, the Doomsday machine idea.
Yeah, the idea that if the buzzing stopped, it would automatically trigger Russia's nuclear missiles. It's a scary thought, very Cold War thriller.
But unlikely.
Very unlikely. The station has gone silent before, for periods like in 2010 when they apparently moved the transmitters. If it were tied to nuclear retaliation, those silences would be, well, problematic.
Yeah, understatement. So not a doomsday switch, but still some kind of important military communication channel. Has anyone official ever talked about it?
Only one person, apparently. Andrei Kartopolov, he's the chairman of the Duma's Defense Committee. He acknowledged it exists and said it, quote, serves an important national defense function unrelated to the perimeter system. Perimeter being the actual name for the dead hand system.
So definite military, definitely still active, definitely secret. Wow.
Exactly. And the fact that this archaic-seeming system is still relevant and its activity seems to mirror geopolitical tensions is just, well, it's another piece of the puzzle when trying to understand Russia's strategy.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here. Shifting U.S. foreign policy views, these deep splits within conservative thought, Russia's own strategic calculations driven by internal politics, and even this weird humming radio station, the buzzer. It really seems clear that domestic issues, whether it's a leader's ideology or public worries about money or internal power struggles, they're not separate from foreign policy. They're deeply, deeply connected.
And that raises a really crucial point, I think. The sources show us a Russia that's apparently modernizing its military incredibly fast, supposedly matching or even beating NATO's annual ammo production in just 3 months sometimes.
Wow.
And at the same time, they're using sophisticated info-war and these covert signals. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., particularly on the conservative side, there's this profound division on how to even respond.
So here's something to think about. As these global tensions keep rising, are these internal divisions, these domestic arguments, and these hidden signals, are they becoming the actual battlegrounds? Is this challenging our whole idea of what power and peace even look like anymore? What do you think as you consider all these complex forces?